May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. You may be seated. This morning, our children and youth have some extra fun things they're working on in their classes, including prepping for next Sunday, which will feature children and youth throughout the service. So please join me now in singing them straight off to their classes so they can get to it.
UUCH's mission is that our inspirational, challenging, and diverse ministries will foster lifelong spiritual seeking and growth, strengthen the bonds of our community, support strong social justice action, welcome diversity, and let people know we are here. If you would like to support us with a monetary contribution, we would be very grateful. Your generosity helps us to keep the lights and air conditioning and heat on, maintain our building and grounds, run our various ministries, pay our staff a fair wage, and support organizations that share our UU values. You can donate online using the QR code on your order of service, or you can put cash or check donations in the offering baskets. Completed Circle of Candles cards like this should also be placed in the offering baskets at this time. You are invited to come forward during this time and quietly drop a stone into the bowl of water right here, next to the ramp, in honor or memory of what you hold in your heart. It is through your generosity that we continue to serve our mission here at UUCH. With gratitude, we now receive the offering.
Friends, will you join with me now for a time of meditation, reflection, prayer? Spirit of all, force of love, bending our universe ever toward justice, be with us in this time. This sacred time where we share with one another the joys, the sorrows, and all in between in our lives. This morning, I share joys from Tim and Teresa Miller. They are so pleased to have their nephew Matt visiting us this weekend from New Haven, Connecticut. Welcome, Matt. Tim also shares how thrilled he was with the music program we had here yesterday. And thanks to all who helped make it happen. It was truly a beautiful time to celebrate music and creativity and the bonds of our community. We lift up that joy. And as we hold those good joys, we also have heavy hearts of sorrow too. We think of the people in Nebraska, Oklahoma, Iowa who have been devastated by tornadoes this week. We pray for them as they rebuild their communities. Our friend Pat Thompson lifts up that her son is also a wrongfully convicted person. He's served almost 10 years of a 25-year sentence, and though they have evidence for a new trial, they continue to be denied due to the past time limit clause. Pat's son's name is Chris Phillips. We hold Pat and Chris in our hearts this morning. And we take a few more breaths together, honoring all that has been shared, holding each other in the joy, the sorrow, and all that is in between. And we know so much more exists between us than has been shared. And so we pray for all that is silent and on our hearts. For all of this, we say, blessed be and amen. And we sing together our responsive music, Meditation on Breathing, that's 1009 in your teal hymnal, as our response. This morning, I have the great privilege to introduce our guest this morning, Beth Shelburne, who is the creator of the EarWitness Podcast. We're going to hear much more about that in our service. This podcast investigates a murder case that happened in our state of Alabama 30 years ago that has resulted in an innocent person being on death row in our community. This is a heartbreaking story of our justice system failing to bring about justice. And a murder case from 30 years ago. Why are we talking about this today? You might be asking yourself. Well, I think there's some important reasons why we as a community of faith are hearing about this morning. In our community, our Unitarian Universalist congregation, we practice covenant in all the things we do. That means as the faithful work of our lives in community, we remind ourselves that we are striving for healthy, joyful, respectful relationships where all people can be free to grow and thrive. We hold each other when we make mistakes. We know that mistakes are part of being human, whether those mistakes are truly accidental or the result of our angry, imperfect humanity. Whatever the reason, we take accountability for our actions. We do what must be done to apologize and make amends. And then we return once more to the work of striving. This is what it means to be part of a covenanting community. We aim high. Sometimes we fail, we own it when we do, and we try again. Here at our church, this is how we do relationship. This is how we do the work of religious community, which at its core is the work of practicing how to be human. And in Unitarian Universalism, we hold sacred values of love, justice, equity, and interdependence. We want to see those values alive and well in the world. We are hoping that the example of our communities spreads those values out into the world. And so today we will hear a story about a case in our home state involving people not all that different from us, where justice tried maybe and definitely failed. And our presenters today are here to remind us that when justice fails, love calls us back to try and try again. When someone is wrongly convicted, something must be done about it. It is never too late to own our mistakes, to make amends, and to try again in love. Beloveds, this is the message, right? It is never too late to own our mistakes, to make amends, to try and try again in love. And I think this is a message that applies here to this case that we'll hear about more, but I think it's a message that we can take and apply to a wide variety of situations happening in our world right now. I don't know about y'all, but I've been awestruck and inspired by the young activists who've set up massive peaceful protest encampments on over 50 college campuses this week. These protesters recognize the United States' complicity in genocide happening in Gaza, and they are asking, begging, demanding our government to make amends and do something different this time. A lot of the news coverage will tell you that these are spoiled kids trying to avoid their finals at best, or radical terrorists at worst. That is not the case, my friends. These are powerful, organized leaders risking their own comfort, risking police brutality and consequences to their real futures because they're unwilling to be silent when they know that horrible injustices are happening in our world. This is the kind of solidarity and action that is necessary when we know unequivocally that the systems are unjust and that they are not working for the best interest of our people. Today, Beth Shelburne will tell the stories of Toforest Johnson's case, a very different miscarriage of justice, local and yet so deeply important. And in this case, it is not yet too late to make a difference, but it could be soon. It matters that we hear these words today, that we listen to this story, and we explore together how we might be a small part of righting this wrong. May we continue to find ways to be a small part of righting many wrongs that exist in our communities. The wise teacher Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Let us then be affected by these injustices. Let the reminder of injustice break our hearts and move us to action. Let us never forget that we are proud members of this interdependent web of mutuality. May we never forget that we belong to each other and that we are what we have in the work of justice. Our choir will share their musical response, "We Want Harmony" by John Mass, and then we will hear directly from Beth Shelburne.
Hello, everyone. I feel so cool with this microphone, kind of like Madonna or Janet Jackson. It's like a dream come true. Thank you all for being here. I'm so happy to have been invited to speak to your congregation. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I just also recognize that there's so much happening in the world right now that it can feel completely overwhelming. When you are a person that is focused on truth and justice and peace and harmony, equality. It's really hard to figure out where we should put our energy because so much is happening. So thank you for being here today in this moment to hear about the work that I've done and to hear about the story that I have tried to shed light on, that is about a man who is currently on Alabama's death row right now as we speak. He is in a 5x8 cell at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama, where he has been for over 25 years. His name is Toforest Johnson, and he turned 50 this year, which means he has spent more time on Alabama's death row in that 5x8 cell, separated from his family, his 5 children, his now 19 grandchildren. He spent more time there than he did as a free citizen. And he is there as an innocent person. I firmly believe that with every journalistic bone in my body, my full heart, my full mind. I have researched this case now for over 3 years, and I have yet to see one shred of evidence to convince me that Toforest Johnson had anything to do with the murder that he was convicted of in 1998. So the folks up, but Fox affiliate station is different from Fox News Channel. But anyway, I worked for WBRC for 9 years. I left in 2019 to pursue independent projects like the podcast that I put together on Toforest Johnson's case. Raise your hand if you've listened to any episodes of EarWitness at all. Okay, so a couple people, thank y'all for listening, but the majority of y'all have not. So I hope after this talk, you will go put it on your phone, find the podcast app, subscribe, and listen to the episodes. Not just because I think it's great because I made it, but I think that it is an incredibly important story for everyone in Alabama to hear, but really everybody in the United States, because this is our justice system that we created, that our taxpayer dollars support. And so all of these things are happening in our name. It is a story about a wrongful conviction, but just so you know a little bit about where I come from, I have been reporting on Alabama's prison system since 2012, and the majority of stories that I report on, the majority of pieces that I write, are not about wrongful convictions. They're about people who committed a crime for a variety of reasons. Some of them had to do with mental health. Some of them had to do with substance use. I've reported on other people who have caused real harm and committed violence and even killed people. But what I focus on in my work is not so much whether a person is guilty or innocent, but what our system is doing to people in the name of accountability, which, as far as I can see, is just causing more and more harm to the people that are in our prison system. So, but Toforest Johnson's story is a story about a wrongful conviction. I think it also is a good illustration of how our justice system works, not just for wrongfully convicted people, not just for Toforest Johnson, but for hundreds of thousands of people who get caught up in our criminal justice system every day. Okay, so the first slide, I title this talk, and I've been talking around Alabama quite a bit, is The How and Why I Made a Podcast About a Man the State Wants to Kill. Quantity and not necessary quality. And I really like to do in-depth reporting where I can spend a lot of time on one story with one subject, and that's what we did in making this story. So the why I made this podcast is pretty easy, that there is an innocent man on death row, and y'all can advance to the next slide. His name is Toforest Johnson. And so doing a podcast to shed light on an incredible injustice of somebody being convicted of capital murder and ending up on death row, the harshest punishment that the government can impose on any citizen. And this man has said he's innocent from the very beginning. That's an easy why. The how I made the podcast is a lot more interesting because it required doing a lot of things that I had never done before. I had never had just an open-ended amount of time to spend on a story. But you can see in those photos, Toforest Johnson has really grown up behind bars. He was arrested when he was 22, and like I said, he is now 50, and has been on death row that entire time. So in making the podcast, we wanted to try to answer two questions, and y'all can advance to the next slide. And it was, how did an innocent man end up on death row? Like, how does that happen? You hear about it happening. I've covered an exoneration in Birmingham, a man named Anthony Ray Hinton, who was incarcerated for 30 years for a murder he didn't commit. He's since written a best-selling book called The Sun Does Shine, which I highly recommend. So it wasn't surprising to me that somebody could get convicted of capital murder and end up on death row that was innocent. But I wanted to know, how does that happen? What went wrong? Was it a case of just absolute corruption, or just a bunch of small mistakes that all added up to this terrible outcome? I really wanted to unpack from the very beginning until where we are right now, how our system that is supposed to be the best in the world facilitated this. And then the second question was, why is he still there? By the time I started covering this story in 2019, many people already believed Toforest Johnson was innocent. And so I started asking from the very beginning, well, he was convicted in 1998. So why is it taking so long to get this wrong made right? What isn't working in the appeals process, or all of these safeguards that are supposed to be in place? Why is he still there? So y'all can go to the next slide. I didn't know anything about this case when I got assigned to cover a hearing in Jefferson County Court in 2019, when I was still working for Fox 6, a hearing involving Toforest Johnson. And I wasn't living in Birmingham when the murder happened in 1995. It was the murder of a sheriff's deputy behind a hotel. If you know Birmingham, Highway 31 that runs right through the city into the suburbs through the Red Mountain Cut. There's a hotel on the right. It's now an Embassy Suites. At the time, it was called the Crown Sterling Suites. And the deputy sheriff who was killed was working security there and was killed behind the hotel a little bit before 1 a.m. No one saw the murder. Just a handful of people heard the shots fired. There was really no evidence to go on. So Toforest Johnson was going back to court, challenging his conviction. And the newsroom thought it would be interesting for me to cover this. And so I read some documents about the case. I knew from his family that are in the pictures there, and his oldest daughter, Shanae, who I spent some time with, that he said he was innocent. His family believed he was innocent. His attorneys believed he was innocent. I really didn't know, but it was interesting. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the hearing that I covered in Jefferson County Court, and it was a packed courtroom. Pretty much all Toforest Johnson's friends and family were there. And what they were arguing in this hearing was that prosecutorial misconduct had been committed during this trial, because here's what everyone was telling me before I really dove into this case, and I wasn't sure if I believed it. His family, his attorneys, and a few other advocates that were familiar with his case. Toforest Johnson is on death row because one person said she overheard him talk about the crime. And that's the only evidence that sent him to death row. So that's what they told me. I went to this hearing. I wasn't sure if I believed it. And then when I sat through this 5-hour hearing, it turns out, oh my gosh, they're right. That is really the only evidence that the state used to convict him of this crime. And he had an alibi, a solid alibi with witnesses who could testify to where he was during the crime. There was no physical evidence or forensic evidence connecting him to the murder. There was no murder weapon recovered. There was no eyewitness that placed him at the scene. There was no eyewitness to the murder. There was one witness, and she's called an EarWitness, which is what we titled the podcast. And an EarWitness is somebody like an eyewitness hears something, an eyewitness sees something, an EarWitness hears something. But this witness didn't hear the murder. She wasn't at the crime scene. She heard what she claims was a phone call from jail that she eavesdropped on and claimed Toforest Johnson talked about the murder. So the woman in the white blazer on the stand is the EarWitness, and she was called to testify. And the reason Toforest Johnson's lawyers were claiming it was prosecutorial misconduct is it came out 17 years after Toforest Johnson was sent to death row that this EarWitness, the woman in white, was paid $5,000 for her testimony by the state of Alabama, and that was hidden. It was hidden from Toforest Johnson, from his attorneys, and it was hidden from the jury. It was kept from the jury. They did not know that she was going to be paid. They didn't know that it was even a possibility. And so the state finally produced the documents and admitted that they had paid this witness. And the claim that Toforest Johnson and his attorneys were making is, this can't stand. This is prosecutorial misconduct. You have to disclose if you're going to pay a witness. By the way, that's legal. Witnesses can be paid, but it has to be transparent. Everybody has to know about it, and they didn't know about it in this case. And that is the key, crucial evidence that sent him to death row. Okay, so I sit through this 5-hour hearing. I learn that all of this is true. Whatever last shred of hope I had left in me that our justice system is the best in the world and really works towards justice fell away at this point. And I decided I've got to pursue this story and figure out everything I can about this. And so I decided to pursue a podcast because, like the old radio serialized dramas of the past, you can spend a whole lot of time on one story in a podcast. So if y'all go to the next slide, I was able to write a lot more stories on the case as I was putting together a plan for the podcast. I looked at this issue of paying witnesses. After that hearing, several jurors came forward expressing regret about their decision to convict Toforest Johnson. Once they learned that the witness was paid, they really felt duped. And that almost never happens. And my heart goes out to them because I think that's a hard thing to do, to come forward and admit that you made a mistake in a capital murder case. And you would have voted differently if you would have known all that there was to know. So I was writing a lot of stories, but I was also seeking funding to do this podcast. And I worked with a producer. We eventually got funding from a company that focuses on wrongful convictions. If y'all want to advance the slide, the company's called Lava for Good. Actually, this was happening also while I was putting together the proposal for the podcast. All kinds of people were coming on board the team Toforest Johnson. Once all this information came out about this paid witness and that the state hid it and that was the only evidence, this one woman's word that she overheard him and there was no way to corroborate that, and she was paid and the state hid it, then lots of people at very high levels of our justice system came on board, including a former Attorney General, Bill Baxley, who was an ardent death penalty supporter. But when he looked at this case, he said, not only does this man deserve a new trial, but I think he's innocent. I think we have an innocent man on death row. And he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. He was so moved. There's prosecutors on that list. There's former judges. And the list is growing every day. So if you advance one more, I think the slide, that's the company that funded the podcast. They're called Lava for Good, and they focus on these kind of nuclear bombs in the justice system when an innocent person ends up getting convicted. And those are some of the other podcasts that they've produced. But it was a good partnership because we all sort of shared the same mission and really finding the truth, not the truth of, is Toforest really innocent, because I already believed him after a year of reporting on this case and reading everything I could get my hands on, including all of the trial transcripts. That wasn't what we wanted to pursue. We wanted to really unpack how the justice system failed in such an epic way. So if you advance one more, we got started and we did a full audit of all of the news coverage of this case. When a police officer is shot and killed, there's a lot of news coverage. And so we started back at the very beginning. We read every court filing, saw every single newspaper article, watched all of the TV news coverage, and really kind of started back at the beginning to reconstruct this whole event from the moment the deputy was shot and killed to where we are today. And that's a look at a little bit of the news coverage. We interviewed more than 80 people, if y'all want to advance one more slide. And so we were just drowning in interviews. It was not a case of not having enough content to put together a story. We had too much. So many people came forward, even people that participated in the conviction were willing to talk to us. We talked to many people in Toforest Johnson's community and family, but also police, prosecutors, investigators, witnesses, all kinds of people that were somehow connected to this case and just built up this huge trove of intelligence on what happened. We also, I mentioned, read all the trial transcripts, did over 80 interviews, and got access to the entire investigative file, which included over 50 hours of archival audio. So we had quite a task on our hands of trying to put this together in a way that made sense for listeners and was accurate and fair, but also exposed the truth from Toforest's perspective, because that's really what we wanted to do. So if you advance one more slide, this is sort of where the case is now. Our podcast came out, and while I was doing reporting on it, Jefferson County's district attorney, Danny Carr, the man in the blue blazer, decided to take a look at the case. He sat in that 2019 hearing with me and was very bothered about many of the things that he heard. That's the office that he runs now. He wasn't working as a prosecutor then. He and I are the same age, so he was also in college at the time when the murder happened, but he was very bothered to know that his office had done this, had paid a witness, had not disclosed it, and that they had based an entire case, this entire conviction, the most serious conviction anybody can get, was predicated on one witness who was compromised because she had been paid. So Danny Carr spent 9 months reviewing this case and concluded this has to get a new trial. We cannot stand behind this conviction anymore. And he filed a brief in court asking a Jefferson County Circuit judge to grant Toforest Johnson a new trial. That is completely unprecedented. It almost never happens. The thing that makes this case even more extraordinary and is really a unicorn in the world of wrongful convictions is the other man that is on this slide. His name is Jeff Wallace, and he is the original trial prosecutor who argued that Toforest Johnson shot and killed the deputy and deserved to die for that crime, and asked a jury to send him to death row, secured a conviction, and has now come forward and said he also supports a new trial. He has doubts about this case. He has doubts about the witness. Jeff Wallace talked to us for the podcast for 4 hours of on-the-record interviews, which, again, I know y'all may not realize what a big deal that is, but it never happens. And the fact that he's supporting a new trial, I called innocence projects around the country, these law firms that work to free innocent people. They had never heard of a case that resulted in the original prosecutor supporting a new trial. So we went back to Jeff Wallace several times in the making of the podcast. And in trying to answer the question, how did this happen, we had to ask some very serious questions about the EarWitness. And it was a difficult decision to make because I don't like investigating private citizens. But her word is the entire case against Toforest Johnson. And we had to look at what was going on in her life, what was motivating her to come forward. Why would she say this? Why didn't they disclose that she was paid? And we learned that she had been a witness in at least 4 other cases for the state. So, among other things that we learned about her, including her grandchildren telling us that she was a scam artist and they didn't trust her as far as they could throw her. And it was really shocking. So we felt like we needed to go back to Jeff Wallace and tell him what we found about this EarWitness, because Jeff had had reservations and doubts about her, concerns about her credibility, starting several years after the conviction, and had come forward with that. So this clip on this slide, if it will play, is when we went to Jeff Wallace, we told him what we had found about the EarWitness, that not only was she paid in secret, but it turns out she's actually like a frequent flyer in the DA's office as a witness. She was like in their, they didn't have BlackBerries back then, but, in their Rolodex as a witness. And that wasn't disclosed either. Jeff was concerned about that, but was always very careful about how he talked about the case. Remember, he prosecuted Toforest Johnson, and he told the jury to send him to death row. So this audio clip is me kind of pushing Jeff because I wanted him to listen to the clips that we had of people we had interviewed about the EarWitness. Do y'all want to try to play it? No? It advanced to the next slide. Yeah. The first voice you'll hear is mine, if it will play. And if it won't, it's no big deal. That will just give y'all more reason to run out after this, put it on your phones, and start listening immediately. It doesn't seem to. Okay. Well, what's that? Okay, so 3 minutes. I'll move along. So that will give y'all more of a chance to, hopefully more of an incentive to listen to it. Really, at the end of the day, what I wanted to do was amplify the experience of Toforest Johnson's family and community. And these are some of his family photos. I've mentioned he has 5 children, 19 grandchildren. He is someone who is loved. He has parented his children the best he can from where he is, but has actually been a remarkable presence in their lives. Operating at such a deficit, being separated from them, living on death row, all of these things that are working against him, but he has remained a strong presence in their lives. And it was really a gift to be able to be adjacent to that kind of love and commitment that I saw that his family has for him. Okay, so the last slide is just what you can do. Obviously, you can listen to the podcast. It's on all podcast platforms. It's called EarWitness. Toforest Johnson has an advocacy website that was set up by Greater Birmingham Ministries. It's toforestjohnson.com. And there is a tab on that website, how you can help. Y'all can click that, put your email in, and you'll be emailed on any case updates or action items that will happen. And then those are other things where you can find my work. I want to see if anybody has questions. Do we have time for questions? Okay, we're going to do questions right after the service. So thank y'all so much for listening. I so appreciate you all being here. I'm happy to stay late and answer any questions. I'm happy to show you how to put the podcast on your phone, which I've done at many talks. So thank you, thank you.
I'm okay. I'll be just fine. Thank you so much, Beth. And as I said, we will, after our service concludes, Beth will be right up front, and please come forward and ask her questions. We are really lucky to have her presence and the presence of this story with us this morning. I'm ready to sing again. How about y'all? Let's rise in body or in spirit for our closing hymn. It's 298, Wake Now My Senses. That's in your gray hymnal, 298. Let's sing.
Let us now take a moment to extinguish our chalice with these words adapted from Adam's slate. When the great mosaic of humanity is treated with respect and dignity, when no person is threatened by hunger or war, when we have extended hospitality to the stranger and tended to the sick, when equity and justice reign everywhere, then we shall all be free. We now extinguish this flame, but keep these dreams with us in our spirits and in our minds as we continue our work to make them real.
Thank you, Cam. Friends, our worship service now comes to a close. I will be at the back of the sanctuary to greet you, but you are very much invited to stick around for questions with Beth up here and out in our fellowship hall, conversation and coffee and snacks. So we have quite a lot of fun on our agenda for this afternoon. Now let us leave this sacred time with these parting words. Let the reminder of injustice break our hearts and move us to action. Let us be people of covenant who strive for goodness and try again when we miss the mark. Let us remember that we are members of this web of mutuality, interdependently connected to all life on this planet, and may we never forget that we belong to each other. May it always be so. Amen. Blessed be, and let's go out singing our rite of community, Be Thou With Us.